This week's whistle is the standard Walton D in brass. You can see here that it is heavily covered in patina if you're American, or patina if you're British. I've noticed that there does seem to be some disagreement on the pronunciation. Another note on Walton's company, it says established in 1922, which apparently it was by a fellow called Martin Walton. They are a diversified company that makes a range of musical instruments, from whistles to other woodwinds to bodhráns, and I think they do some concertinas and other interesting traditional instruments. I don't know the full range of what they do, but they do it out of Dublin, North Frederick Street, it says. This is one of the whistles that I have had for the longest. I actually bought this one shortly after I procured my first Walton whistle, which was the Walton C, and I've had a mellow D longer. There was something interesting about the standard D to me. The difference between it and the melody or the C whistle is that it has a slenderer tube. Otherwise, same construction. It is a brass barrel, plastic head. There is a thin plastic coating of some kind, almost like a mylar, that is applied to the barrel of the Walton's whistles that you don't necessarily find on a lot of other whistles. I know Fadog doesn't use that. It comes off eventually, or it will rub off. This whistle was relegated to sort of a practice whistle that I kept in the glove box of the car for quite some time. I have played it in the woods. I played it standing in the ocean. I have subjected it to wind and rain and salt water and heat and freezing cold and every other condition imaginable for humans. So it looks a bit worse for wear. It looks like a well-used whistle. Pros of this whistle are that it's cheap. Walton whistles are really pretty nice for the money. You can get them in the States thanks to Walton Irish Music USA for $9, maybe $10. They are easily playable, user-friendly. The Walton whistles do get sort of a bad rap among whistle players, that they are kind of unstable or shrieky. I haven't found that to be any more true of the Walton whistles than it is of the Fadog or the Acorn or standard generation whistles, especially the brass ones. I've had whistles that cost 3 and 4 times as much as this one that don't outperform it in any way. They aren't better intonated. Strangely, if you're going to do better than this, you're probably going to have to go boutique, with the exception of some things like Susato or Dixon. However, Susato whistles being all ABS and Dixon whistles being of a different head design and generally with different construction are going to have some different tone issues or characteristics that are not kind of the traditional Irish whistle sound. That's what you're getting from a Walton Standard D, a brass Fadog, a generation. When it comes to the cons of this whistle, I think it is simply the normal stuff that you get with a mass-produced plastic head tin whistle. It's a cylindrical bore, so there is some compromise in tuning from the lower octave to the second octave. It does have quite a bit higher volume of notes in the second octave, but none of the high notes in the second octave all the way up to the super high third octave, D overblown double. They're not hard to reach. They're not particularly difficult to nail down. So I don't understand where the bad reputation really comes from, unless they really are people that have become accustomed to more specialized, handmade, or individually designed whistles. Now, this whistle isn't entirely stock. I have done the old Blue Tack fill in the cavity under the windway. I have taken the head off in order to do so, and in replacing the head have adjusted the tuning a little bit. These, just like the Fadogs, the Acorns, Generations at times, do tend to come from the factory a little sharper than necessary. A little adjustment will turn this into a perfectly usable, traditional sounding Irish whistle. I don't prefer brass bodies. I don't prefer the raspier tone. I do have another one of these with a nickel body that I actually like more than this. But this whistle has been such a sturdy, stable workhorse that despite my minimum amount of care and even what I might consider to be serious neglect, continues to be a reliable and decent sounding whistle. So is the Walton Standard D a good beginner whistle? Absolutely. Not quite as good as its big brother, the Mellow D. Not necessarily any better or any worse than something like the Fadog in a brass body or some of the Generations, but it's solid. It has exactly the same capabilities and shortcomings of all of those other whistles. It has about the same amount of consistency in production as the Fadogs do. I think it's pretty brilliant for $9. Is it going to stand up next to something like Killarney's or Lear whistles or even some of the more expensive Dixons? Maybe not, but it's pretty darn good. There's no reason not to have one, especially when, as you can see here, it doesn't really matter how stained it gets. This thing has been through the wars, and it works great. That was the Walton Standard D in brass. Thank you for watching again, and I look forward to seeing you next week when we try something completely different.